Here we go. Another major milestone for the Chicks. We're celebrating our third anniversary.
That's right. So for the 150th time, this is Chick to Chick.
Our third anniversary, and this is podcast episode 150. What?
Wow.
What? This is so exciting.
It's gone so fast.
It really has.
We've had so many great topics. We've talked to so many interesting guests. We've sparred a little, you and me, in topics that we might not have seen eye to eye on, which is always fun. And it's so funny because when we talked about doing this podcast, we're like, what do we talk about? It's the third anniversary. And we both agreed that we should talk about the podcast that we really enjoyed. And of course, like we do, we end up picking the same top three.
Unbelievable. There are so many times during the course of the day or course of the week that we're just chatting and we both go, that's a podcast. And this is how we've been operating over the past 3 years. This has really been a joy for us, a labor of love. We love the fact that our audience keeps growing and growing. And we really love everything that we chirp about, but there are some podcasts that just stood out to us for various reasons. For instance, the podcast that we both liked a lot, it was called Teen Periods, What a Pain. And this first came out back in May of 2021. I'm going to start with you. Why did you like it?
Well, I have all daughters, right? So we've been dealing with periods for a long time. I had terrible periods. My mother had terrible periods. And I felt like it wasn't talked about enough. You know, you kind of shushed it under the rug every single month if you felt terrible, or it was just meant to deal with. You just got to deal with it. It's just the way it is. And the doctor who we spoke with was so warm and loving. And she was like, hey, you don't need to suffer. We don't need to suffer. Young girls don't need to suffer. I thought I loved that.
Guess what?
Yeah.
I feel the same way that you do.
And there you go.
I do. I mean, I had horrible, horrible pain. And I felt like as a teenager, nobody was listening to me. Nobody was hearing me. Take a couple of pills, take a couple of Advil, go take a nap. And I felt like this doctor validated what we were going through. She heard us. She's hearing young girls, and she wants to help young girls. And here's a little clip from that podcast. What causes that pain, and what can teenage girls do about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get asked that question all the time at work. The old school answer is that it's because younger people are nervous about their periods and they anticipate their periods coming, and they're probably a little bit emotionally dysregulated, and maybe they have some worry about their fathers, and it's really garbage. That's all garbage. That's not true. So the fact is that younger bodies produce more molecules called prostaglandins at the time of menstruation and in a couple of days preceding it. And prostaglandins make muscles contract, and they also stimulate pain molecule receptors. And younger bodies have more pain molecule receptors throughout the pelvis. So what that means is that younger bodies make more molecules that hurt, and then they also are more sensitive to them after that. So it just hurts more, biochemically speaking.
So this next podcast that, again, we both love so much is called Sweet Grace Gowns. Now, this podcast focused on giving a gift to parents who are grieving because they lost their baby right after delivery in the hospital. They're not taking their baby home. And this podcast was so important. It was so important to you that you gave one of those gifts, and that was a wedding gown.
Yeah, I really love this organization. I love the thought behind it. My wedding dress had been sitting in a box for 30 years doing nothing. Like, what am I going to do with this? Right. I have a son, and even if I had a daughter, why were those big puffy sleeves from the 80s?
It's a vintage look, but whatever.
Nobody wants this look. And I just thought, you know, for a family to lose a baby and to be faced with that pain and that trauma, and if I could help in some way, I loved knowing that this gown was going to be put to good use. They take your wedding dress, they turn it into little burial outfits for babies. It's just a beautiful thing. And we just love this podcast, and we love the message. And here's a clip from that podcast.
So they're presented a whole slew of resources at the same time. So things they can use in photographs, things they can use in their first moments with their baby. We try to normalize that time and make everything just as it would be if you were delivering a baby who was living. It's the parent's only time to make memories with that child. And so we try to do as many things as we can to make sure they get as many memories as they can. But often clothing is not something they're thinking of as they're running out the door in a last minute emergency type situation. So this gives them something beautiful to put on their baby in a really dark moment.
So a topic that we came up with, we thought was really important, and that was making your marriage work. Now, what's interesting about this podcast is you would think that it would come from wise, sage words from someone married, a couple married for like 30, 40 years. No. It's a couple married for 10 years, but they're just so unique, and they shared their story, and it was so beautiful. It's no wonder we fell in love with this podcast.
Absolutely. And it was, again, one of those funny things. Which one was your favorite, Carrie? And this was a third one that was so favorite. Yeah. And the thing that I love about what we do, I feel like we're constantly learning.
Oh, yeah. That's what makes it actually more interesting and fun.
And this OG actually learned a thing or two from this wise young couple. Again, as you said, they've only been married for 10 years, but something that the wife said really struck a chord with me, and she's made an impact on my life, and I've actually changed the way I think. She said during this podcast that she and her husband would argue, which all married couples do, and sometimes he would say some unsavory things. But this is what got me, what she said.
Yeah.
You know what she said.
Yes, she said, I give him grace.
Yes, she said, I give him grace. She said, he may say some things that I don't like, and he may get angry. She goes, but I give him grace because I know what's in his heart. And Jessica, that was spectacular. And here's a clip of that podcast.
I think the most important thing for us when I look at how our relationship works is that we do give each other grace when the words aren't perfect. And I think there's been many a times when I've said something and I've been like, oh, that was not, and she looks at me a certain way and she gives me that little bit of grace that I need, that I didn't really mean to say it that way. And I don't have to follow around the house forever and say, I didn't mean it. She just says, I understand you didn't mean it. Those weren't the words that were appropriate there, but I appreciate that you're willing to share this with me and that you're willing to debate this with me. So I think it's just having that communication and having that constant struggle, but also just giving each other a little bit of grace.
Okay, so those were 3 podcasts that we both loved. Now, this is where we changed a little. This next podcast I loved just because I thought it was a riot.
Well, it was a riot.
It was so funny. It was with my buddy, Ken Ullman, and the male adventures of online dating. And, we women always talk about, online dating and what we go through and the crazy things that we see and what we have to deal with. And he's like, wait a minute here. I want to give the male perspective. And it was a riot. He did. He had like this whole list.
10 list.
He had a list in front of him. And we went all the things like that women, what we shouldn't do. And he talked about photos and chatter. And it was so funny. Were you not dying when he was talking?
That was hilarious. Did you learn anything in the top 10 list?
I don't do online dating. So, it just was funny. It was comic relief. It was a good time. It was actually one of our most popular podcasts. And he brought a lot of levity to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of truth.
There is a lot of truth. And that was the thing we loved about it. He was very truthful and vulnerable, but it was very funny.
It was so funny. So you have to check that out. That podcast dropped back in November of 2021. And in fact, the whole month of November, we renamed it and called it...
It was Movember.
It was Movember because it was all about men's issues. And that was one of the podcasts that was all devoted to men that I truly enjoyed. And there was another podcast during Movember that you really liked. And why did you like that?
Still in November 21, it was male eating disorders. And I don't have any boys. I have all girls. But one thing became crystal clear to me is that young men share a similar disorder when it comes to eating. We just don't think about it. We don't address it. I don't know if young men don't talk about it. I think it's very much more taboo for young men. So I thought this was a crucial podcast. And Matt, who delivered all this incredible information about his life and what he went through, I have to believe that he helped someone, if not more than one or two people, who tuned into that podcast, because I have to believe that someone listening to a male talking about how he had an eating disorder and how he got through it, I have to believe that that changed the perspective of how someone sees themselves and that they got help, because he really talked about that. Do not be afraid to ask for help. So I just love that podcast because as a woman, I learned a lot about something I don't know.
Well, and I think the big thing is that we're talking about things that people don't necessarily want to talk about it. And when you do, you raise awareness. And if somebody else is going through a similar situation, they're like, oh, yes, it's not just me. Somebody else is dealing with this too.
Feel heard.
And I can get help. I feel heard.
Yeah.
And so really our motivation with so many things that we do is we just want to help people, raise awareness, provide information and education, but do it in a fun way.
Yep.
Always got to have
Best
fun.
we can. We
always
try
got to have fun.
So if you want to see any of the podcasts that we just chirped about here, you can go to chick2chick.com. I'm sure there's others that you're thinking you didn't see or ones you want to refresh. The point is we appreciate you. We thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you'll come back when we chirp about another topic.
And happy anniversary to us.